So I want to get us started. So I'm Carolyn Eswine. I'm with the Department of Urban Planning at UW-Milwaukee. We're here at the School of Architecture Urban Planning. This is our Innovative Cities lecture series. We have different guests come in once a month. So again, check out our website. We have great speakers coming up next month as well. We have Ray Hill from Historic King Drive Bid. I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge in Milwaukee that we are on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homeland along the southwest shores of Middag, North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin's sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. We encourage you to take a look at the map and see who the native tribes were in your area. It's really important, we think, as land use planners and community development groups to understand the indigenous communities that were here before us. So welcome. I'm going to pass it very quickly to Gabe Yeager, who is here with us at UWM, but also the city of Milwaukee. He's the downtown placemaking expert, essentially. He's director of public space initiatives. He has lots to share. We have a great panel discussion, so I encourage you to type your questions into the chat. And if appropriate, I'll interject a little bit, but they are going to hold some time at the end for a good dialogue back and forth. But we know this is a topic that many people are interested in. So I will pass it to Gabe. Welcome.
You caught that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Carolyn. I really appreciate the opportunity and wanted to thank our panelists too from across the country joining us. Really exciting. So we're going to do a quick icebreaker for the first 15 minutes. We're going to do a 3-minute introduction where each of us will introduce our district, a little bit about ourselves. Lisa described it as our pathway to placemaking, and then a fun and innovative project that we wanted to highlight. So I'll begin just to break the ice, a little bit about Milwaukee Downtown Bid 21. We are the largest business improvement district in the state of Wisconsin. We were established in 1997, really to create a clean, safe, and friendly downtown. You'll hear those 3 words quite a bit throughout the presentation, but what's interesting is we're all kind of phasing into what the Bid 2.0 looks like. And that's where events, activation, economic development come into play. Our core services in downtown Milwaukee continue to be our Clean Sweep Ambassador Service Program and Public Service Ambassador Program, but we're also heavily engaged in marketing and events, including Taste and Toast, which is happening this week through Friday at several downtown restaurants. And we're engaged in economic development, particularly with the Downtown Area Plan, with the city of Milwaukee, and this year we're participating in the Value of Downtown report with the International Downtown Association, and I get the opportunity, the privilege to help activate our public spaces with activations and art. A little bit about me quickly, as Carolyn mentioned, I'm here at the School of Architecture. I started at a very young age with my passion with placemaking and city operations. That's me as like a 3-year-old street sweeping my neighborhood, and I've stuck with it. Really believe in this idea of leaving the place that you live better than how you found it. I came to Milwaukee for the School of Architecture with my Bachelor of Architectural Studies, interned with Milwaukee Downtown for 4 years, and then have worked with them full-time for 4 years, first as the Downtown Environment Specialist and now as Director of Public Space Initiatives. And as an innovative project, this was a hard one to choose because it's like asking for your favorite dog, your favorite kid. But one of the most exciting projects we've been able to launch in downtown Milwaukee is Reimagine Red Arrow Park. That really took, if you're familiar with Milwaukee, it's across the street from City Hall. It's really a desolate public space. That other than the ice skating rink, it really not a lot of activation happens in this place. But as we started to peel back the layers of what wasn't working and what wasn't making this space feel welcoming, there's significant historical, events that took place in the park that really the downtown bid through this public-private partnership began a community healing process. And one of those events being the fatal shooting of Dontre Hamilton in 2014. So in the past year, these are photos all in the past year of events and activations that we've been able to do with our community to bring people back into the public space. And also have important conversations on race and inclusivity, which we'll be talking about later in our panel. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lisa with the Downtown Minneapolis.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Gabe. It's such an honor to be here with the crew you've assembled here. These are some amazing colleagues, and I'm really excited to share it with everyone who's joined the session today. I am Lisa Middag. I am from the Minneapolis Downtown Improvement District, and as this slide will tell you, we've been around since 2009. Our downtown area is 120 square blocks of downtown Minneapolis. So, and our mission, as Gabe said, and the mission of so many of our organizations, clean, green, safe, and vibrant. I will say I am coming to you from my office today, and my office is in the front of a storefront space, and our storefront space is open to the public. So anything can happen out there. I'll just give you all a heads up that when we believe in making downtown welcoming, that means to everyone, and our door is open and people can come in and talk to us at any time. So I'm going to share with you how I got to be where I am. Like I spent 15 years working at the Walker Art Center as their design studio and publications director. That means I was a book publisher, but we presented from the lens of our design studio, great design thinkers from around the country. And I heard someone speak. Julie Bartman from Dirt Studios in North Carolina came and spoke. And it was like a revolutionary moment for me. And I realized that this is the next thing that I need to do. So I took a pathway through getting my master's at the University of Minnesota, the Humphrey School. And then from there, left the Walker after a great 15-year career in a dream job when it was no longer my dream job. And went to work for Hennepin County in community and economic development. Now, because of my experience with the arts and my experience with artists, almost everything I did, and because of my communications work at the Walker and working in publishing, it's sort of like I brought those things along with me, and I'm sure that's what will happen for everyone else's career pathway too. And you find yourself, I work with artists, I work in community engagement, and I care about communities and community and economic development. So that led me to the part of that work at Hennepin County that really kind of was their first forays kind of into using placemaking strategies to have conversations with communities about transit investments. While I was doing that, I was interested in how this work can be more grounded in community, can be more reciprocal with artists. And so I completed a couple of programs that are training programs, and I just mention them here because there are probably similar programs in all of your own communities, and don't distance yourself from those. Take advantage of those opportunities. The Creative Community Leadership Institute was led by Intermedia Arts originally, and now is housed at Springboard for the Arts in Minneapolis. It's a great program that teaches people how to work in community and with artists. I also went through the Project for Public Space training in New York, and was able to join the Leadership Council there. And so that's been like how you find your people in the work. Besides these great colleagues who I've met at conferences and so forth. So I wanted to highlight a project we're working on, which we're calling the Alleyway Project. We assume someday we'll have another name for it, but we're waiting till we kind of arrive at a thing. But what's been so interesting about it is it's like so many of our alleyways downtown, a sort of neglected space. In this case, it was a really large space, which you can see from the aerial here of the paint on the pavement. And the red building to the lower end of the frame is a high school for the arts. On the north end of the frame is a co-working space. And then to the right is a downtown university, St. Thomas. So we had a real opportunity in working with these partners to change what was happening in this space, which was essentially a lot of trash, a lot of drug use, a little bit of prostitution and some challenges, and right at a school, right? It just seemed like kind of a no-brainer. So we've been working with them over the past 2 years with all of those partners who are adjacent to test drive a lot of strategies. We've had classes out in the space. You'll see in this aerial view of the paint, it's a basketball court, it's a half court, and we have a mobile basketball hoop that can come out. You see FAIR put their tag on the wall, so they've been using it to teach young artists how to work with spray paint, and have been hosting their monthly community events called 5 to 10 on Hennepin in conjunction with Hennepin Theater Trust. The last slide on the left you'll see here is Alley Cats, and that's like our theater district is right adjacent to this, and we premiered Cats late last fall, and so we had an Alley Cats collecting for the opening night option. So with that, I will pass it along. I hope I didn't go too long.
We'll introduce Liz next. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa. Bienvenidos. My name is Liz. I proudly work in downtown San Antonio for Centro San Antonio. We're a placemaking nonprofit dedicated to making downtown more beautiful, playful, welcoming, and prosperous, highlighting really the spirit of San Antonio. While we're champions of greater downtown, as the others mentioned, our primary job is to really manage the public improvement district. The PID is only literally 0.8 square of a mile, which is kind of crazy for the 7th largest city. But what we lack in size, we definitely make up for in cultural, historic assets. So everything from architecture to cultural heritage traditions to the 2 most visited spaces in Texas, the Alamo and the Riverwalk. Our core work is very similar, clean and safe, and we augment that, of course, with events, marketing, small business support, public art, capital improvements, and advocacy. Centro has been around for 40 years, if you can believe it. We started out as a downtown owners association in '82 and have really grown and matured as an organization and PID on what our role is and really the impact we can have. I added some sexy stats. I'm always impressed with knowing kind of the underbelly of a district, but some really big highlights that aren't included in this are San Antonio is a 64% Hispanic population. So we are a majority minority community, which really is kind of the future of the United States. We have 7.3 million annual visitors. That's an incredible amount. We felt that during the pandemic, but luckily we've been able to really rally and bring back that tourism and economy. One of the biggest things, though, that I think people don't realize about San Antonio is that we are one of the fastest growing US economies. The population is nearly 2.6 million, and we're projected to welcome another 1 million people, 1 million new residents by 2040. So a lot of the planning and a lot of the stress and strategies have been marrying the idea of knowing people are coming with reconciling what's going on with our hyperlocals right now. A little bit about me. I am definitely not your traditional practitioner or placemaker. I started off much like Lisa. I'm seeing some similarities of attributes and experience, but I started out working at a movie theater in college. It was the Alamo Drafthouse, if you're familiar with it. It's a dinner theater, but very creative. And I started out as a server and grew with that organization over 10 years. Serving as all kinds of roles, but really more importantly, leveraging kind of the community relationships and marketing engagement with experiences. So we would host quote-alongs and sing-alongs, but they weren't just movies. They were really nostalgic warfare and really fun and charismatic experiences. I, like Lisa, I was really satisfied and having fun, but I got a little bug, and our now mayor, Ron Nirenberg, hosted a movie screening when he was running for council. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, great film if you haven't seen it. But within that, it really inspired me, like, how am I contributing and working towards greater public good? So I left after 10 years, went back to school to study public administration because I thought it was enough of a combo of public good with some civic as well as some governance and municipality understanding. And I got super lucky in that my professor was then interim mayor Ivy Taylor. And I was an older student, and so none of the younger criminal justice or nonprofit management or public administration knew it. And I was like, oh my God, the mayor, she's here. She offered me a position, and I got to work with her on getting elected formally into mayor. It was very interesting to learn from her because she was nonpartisan urban planner, and so going into mayor, it was definitely a transition for us as a community. Our makeup is council manager, so we have a weak mayor form of government, if you're familiar. So our city manager is really doing all the funding decisions, but the mayor really is involved in more of those sentiment perceptions and really rallying and mobilizing our city. So from there, I got to work on some really catalytic projects, Hemisphere, San Pedro Creek, which are now coming online. But during that time, I really got to move from a non-user to a student to then an employee and then a really an enthusiast and advocate. So I started falling in love with downtown, which was the backdrop of all of these great work and projects. So then I went to a luncheon that Centro was hosting and found a career that married my love of downtown and some of the background. And it's really helped out in some skill sets that I don't believe I could have gotten either from private sector experience or from education. Sometimes you have to fail and work with people and figure out nonviolent communication and listening skills. And all of that was really honed during that public administration, public engagement, and social media management. So with that, the project, and it's interesting, it's another alley, sorry Lisa, but Peacock Alley is really an interesting project for us. It's 100 feet, so it's not a massive alley, but it's a block away from the Alamo, and it's a block away from historic Houston Street, which was a bustling corridor prior to the onset of the vehicle and urban sprawl. At one point, Houston Street was compared to Fifth Avenue in retail and square footage evaluation, if you can believe it. But with the onset of the vehicle, really lost a lot of the density, including employees and residents. Peacock Alley, we started doing little things right before the pandemic and then had to shut down. But in spite of the pandemic, we used it as an opportunity to activate in very small, scalable, and manageable ways. It was important for us to activate the space to remind people that they could come downtown, that they could support small businesses, that downtown was theirs, and really there was a moment for them to reclaim it, but it was passive enough and manageable enough to where it wasn't overwhelming. And what we found is this incredible tap for hyper local talent. So we would put out open calls, we would ask people for their ideas, and then we would welcome them to the alley and provide them some nominal budgeting and funding to support their dreams and visions. And what we found is they wanted to do everything in the alley that we had never imagined. It became a communal space, so Centro wasn't even included. They just started taking over the alley and we were all about it. But what was really incredible is what started as kind of a single use to inspire people to really support local, it really reinvigorated people's love for downtown. One of my favorite activators is DJ Despianada. Her name is Bonnie Cisneros. She's a 4th generation Tejana educator. And she wanted to do an earring event in the alley. So she created her own artwork. She brought in her own partners, but the quote below really for me is what the overarching metric and the accomplishment of the alley is. So it reinvigorated her love for downtown. You know, she supports that we see locals as artists and as natural resources that can really bring their vision to life in the alley. And really it inspired this new movement during and post-pandemic that downtown is for locals, which was a narrative we were managing prior to the pandemic, and really gave Centro some street cred in creating these experiences that you could find in Times Square or in Milwaukee or in other destinations that have done such a great job at placemaking. So sorry, there's 2 alleys, but alleys can be very different. Each alley and surface lot and underutilized space is very unique, but they can really lend themselves to some great narratives and great experimentation.
Thanks, Liz. And we love Peacock Alley. We refer to it all the time and inspired by all your great work in San Antonio. So next, so excited to introduce Jean from Times Square Alliance.
Thank you, Gabe. It's great to be here with everyone. I'm here repping Times Square. I'm the VP of Arts and Culture for the Times Square Alliance, and I also run the public art program here. So Times Square, you know, we have an average of 300,000 people coming through here every day, which is just shy of our 2019 numbers. And that totals 100 million people, which is like a hard number for me to even fathom. And I actually try not to. It is a small district in terms of its footprint. It's only 0.19 square miles or 26 square blocks. But it is, and it's only 1% of the city's landmass, but it generates 7% of the city's jobs and 15% of the total economic output. We have 39 Broadway theaters, 306 buildings, 653 storefronts, 310 of which are food and beverage oriented, 1,800 commercial tenants in all. And so much like every organization here, you know, our primary goals are to keep Times Square safe and clean, and we want to advocate for our stakeholders and constituents. But we've also evolved. Gabe, you mentioned like you're in this 2.0 phase. I think we've evolved over the years to take on major events. So we run New Year's Eve, and we do our own signature events like Solstice. On the longest day of the year, we have 3,000 people doing yoga here. We're lucky enough to have a public art program, and really just not only support our theaters and our neighbors and our hotels and restaurants, but also, you know, continue to keep framing Times Square as a cultural district. It's been exciting to be in Times Square. You know, I started in 2019, so I can get into a little bit about me if we want to move on to that section, which I appreciate because it's really nice to hear everyone's pathways here. I started in 2019, so right before the pandemic, and it's been a really incredible arc and an incredible place to be through these major years of kind of global transition. I started out with an international relations degree from Boston University. Can't really tell you why. I went to work in restaurants as well. Liz, we share that track, both in Boston and in San Francisco, which I think is really great prep for public art, and probably good prep for just being out in Times Square in general. I started working in galleries in Oakland, California. I organized, which I wasn't using this term then, but I would call it now, site-specific installations and pop-up events at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. So an unconventional space, bringing temporary installations into this Gothic cathedral. And then realized that arts was really the track I wanted to pursue. And so I got my arts administration master's from NYU, which brought me back to the East Coast. And I landed this amazing job with in public art with Creative Time, which is another nonprofit here that organizes major public art installations all throughout the city, often lesser known spaces of the city, like the Brooklyn Army Terminal or the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And they really had no limits around what public art could be. So I ended up working on these large scale commissions that involved sugar or, you know, pigeons choreographed in flight with avian leg bands lit up at night, solar powered ice cream trucks, you know, all sorts of projects that got me to know the city a little bit better, but also just expand my notion around what public art and public engagement could look like. And then that brings me to Times Square Arts. So like I said, trying to continue to frame Times Square as a cultural district, but leading the public art program, which is responsible for installations and this program called Midnight Moment, which I'll touch on later, as well as performances and our open air summer series. The innovative project I wanted to highlight is actually on view now. Today is the last day. For 15 years, which precedes the public art program in and of itself, for 15 years, we've been running the annual Love and Design competition in Times Square. So basically every February for the calendar month, we have an installation by an emerging design firm or architecture firm that is themed around notions of love. This could be romantic love. It could be love for your community. We try and keep that term open and expansive, but it ties in kind of nicely with the fact that Valentine's Day is square in the middle of the month. We also use this as a kind of framing and backdrop for outdoor weddings, surprise proposals, and vow renewals on the 14th. So it's a nice tie-in there. And then we also just kind of leverage it as an opportunity to promote what else is going on in the district. A lot of people have deals and specials and, you know, discounts on theater tickets in February. This was originally conceived of as a way to just drive visibility and some foot traffic and engagement within our district and the businesses within our district in a month that's typically slow. So big season, obviously around the holidays in Times Square, but January and February is a dip down across many levels, even pedestrian counts. And it's just been a really fun program to be a part of. This month is a piece called Love's Hedge. So it's this kind of maze-like artificial hedgerows with heart cutouts and all of these different spaces for exploration and discovery. And of course, countless selfies. And it's been a lovely event. You know, on Valentine's Day itself, we had 380,000 people here in the district. So I don't know if this installation was, you know, responsible for that, but it's a really wonderful way to galvanize engagement and community in an otherwise slow month.
So incredible. Thank you so much, Jean. And the energy of Times Square is always electric when you're walking through the bow tie and knowing that 300,000 people go through that space a day, and the Times Square Alliance has a key role in managing the flow of pedestrians and activation of that space and what makes that space so unique. And I think what's amazing about these three cities is that there's iconic places that we can pretty quickly off the top of our head list in each city that makes a place so dynamic, whether it's Times Square, whether it's the Riverwalk in San Antonio, whether even Nicollet in Minneapolis. So think of those to the people joining us on the call. Think about those special places that that you think of that have such a great connection with, and what makes it those great spaces. So we'll get into that later. We wanted to begin with a conversation for the next 10 minutes on just the trend, the shift that has happened in the last really, Jean, you said you joined in 2019 to Times Square Alliance. A lot happened between 2019 and 2022. So from the pandemic to a racial reckoning, a new work environment, significant events have reshaped our cities in recent years. How has this influenced your work in placemaking? And we're going to begin with Lisa in Minneapolis, really the epicenter of the Black Lives Matter movement, and a city that is rebuilding and reshaping the conversation. So Lisa, we'll start with you.
Thanks so much, Gabe. And we're starting with an image of George Floyd Square. And this isn't a project, right? This is, it's not a project by an organization, and it's not in our downtown. It's on our south side where George Floyd was murdered. But I wanted to start with it because when you ask me what has changed is, I think in general, all of our recognition that public space and the approaches people have to it and their sense of ownership that they have for it has changed dramatically. So throughout the response to George Floyd's murder, throughout the levels and layers of protest and some unrest or uprising, if you prefer, like there has been an incredible wave of public feeling and demonstration and attachment to public spaces. There's been this whole shift in the notion of ownership, right? And so what's great about this slide is it just sort of demonstrates the public took ownership. This is a city intersection. And people said, wait a minute, this happened here. We need to acknowledge this happened here. This will be a part of recognizing the trauma that happened and recognizing the community's need to share in a healing process with each other in this space. So when I think of what has changed in our work, some of that has to do with who are we continuing to engage in conversation. Like for those of us who've been doing this work in an inclusive way, we've had large community conversations, right? But it's even more important than ever that we're reaching out beyond. So if you work for a business improvement district, depending on the recipe at your individual city, our budget is paid primarily by commercial property owners downtown, right? So they have our ear, they're on our board, they can reach out to me on a phone, they can call me anytime. But how are we engaging with the broader downtown community? And how are we trying to acknowledge that for downtown to feel like a place where everyone belongs, people need to feel that ownership? And that isn't based on classical, sort of Western notions of property ownership, right? It's about place, it's about culture, it's about community. And so when I think of a shift that's happened for us, it's not so much, it's really that. It's really like recognize that if we're going to create a space of belonging downtown, we have to look at a broader public, we have to listen to a broader public, we have to create spaces that are welcoming to a broader public of people. And in some cases, we may need to even dial back how we listen to other people who have had really ready access to us, right? So.
Thank you so much. I know we can talk about this specific question all day, but we want to continue to move along. So Jean, I know you have a sequence of slides to kind of walk us through on Times Square response to the last 3-4 years.
Yeah, I mean, this question made me think about the Messages for the City campaign that we started, I mean, in April of 2020, I think is when we initially had it organized, and it ran for about a year or so, right at the height of the pandemic. Well, first we were taken off guard by how frequently images of an empty Times Square appeared in the news as a signifier of how swiftly public life and life in general was changing. I mean, we also knew that it wasn't empty, it was significantly quieter, but there were still 30,000 people coming through the district every day, and that was primarily essential workers, healthcare workers that were staying in hotels here. It was our own sanitation and safety staff. So even though it put our pre-organized plans on hold, there was still this impulse, and for us, a rationale and a reason to try and get art and artists' messages and voices out into the world in some way. And the best and easiest way we could do that, virtually, was through our billboards. And we knew that artists and other organizations shared the same impulse. So, Poster House was an organization here that was doing something similar. For Freedoms is a collective that often works with artists' messages on billboards. And so the three of us joined forces. We kind of went through our immediate network of artists to try and gather together. Basically, at first it was public service announcements. It was, Jenny Holzer making this piece about protecting one another and protecting yourself. And someone else had done a piece about just washing your hands. I mean, this was like that peak of, 6 feet apart and masks outside moment. And then, what was unique also on the other end was that our billboard operators were having a huge dip in advertising sales. So they were able to donate more time. And we found a few that we already had good relationships with that were willing to program these PSAs like every 15 minutes, every hour, all day long, all night. So it was this incredible uptick in donated time. And it also just, I think, reset our relationship with some of our stakeholders in that way. I think there was a shared interest on their part to either just get some form of, message out into the world as well, to be a good corporate citizen, to use the platform they had to actually speak to the current cultural moment. And so that sense of responsibility was shared. And what it did was open up opportunities for new campaigns that continued throughout like the next 2 years. Oftentimes people would come to us on our board, or if you want to back up for the slide before, Gabe, I just want to point out these three, when there was an uptick of anti-Asian hate crimes in the city, a board member and a screen operator came to us and said, can you please give me something I can put on my billboard to speak to this in some way? So it was both artists continuing to want to speak around voting for the presidential election, social and racial issues, and we found ways to not only program on our billboards, but I just want to point out our big bellies, which is our term for our solar compacted trash cans, which is, there's hundreds of them all throughout the district at eye level. So we really tried to roll out several campaigns, and we found that people were more receptive to them here than they'd even been before. And then I will just say for the next slide, it was a shot of our Midnight Moment program. So this was already running prior to the pandemic. It's a program that's been running for 10 years. It's 3 minutes at midnight, basically 11:57 to midnight, that where an artist's video work is featured, synchronized on many screens. I know we have an unfair advantage because we just have a lot of screens, but this started 10 years ago on about 8 or 9 screens. In 2019, we had 60. Today, we have 100. So even with our regular programming, there was just like there are more open doors, more interest in how art can take over commercial spaces. And, we can all work together on things that make Times Square special and unique.
Thank you so much, Jean. And what is unique about the Midnight Moment for the guests joining us, 3 minutes, correct? From, was it 11:57 to midnight? If you wanted to kind of go over what makes that so unique.
Sure. So every single night of the year, except for New Year's Eve, it's 364 nights a year, no matter what, rain or shine, you can come to Times Square. And for the 3 minutes leading up to midnight, you got that right, 11:57 to 12 a.m., the billboards pause on their regular advertising programming, and they all synchronize to play a 3-minute artist's video work. So this was in March of last year. This is a piece by Corey Archangel. They're not all highly kind of saturated and graphic like this, but they range from kind of documentary style videos to animations. And basically each of those individual screen operators have to approve the work every month. So that's, organizations like Morgan Stanley and Disney and Forever 21 and American Eagle and real estate developers all have to agree on the same artwork every month and play it for 3 minutes every night on their billboard. And there's a few holdouts. You might be able to notice them in this picture. I'm not going to name names, but we're still plugging away. We're like knocking on doors, trying to get the stubborn holdouts to join us, because there's 100, but I believe people ask me this all the time. I don't know how many screens are in Times Square, individual displays, but it's got to be somewhere between 100 and 150. So we're working on total domination soon.
Well, keep up the great work. And I think the one thing that makes, while most cities don't have the number of screens that Times Square has, what Midnight Moment teaches us is really knowing the assets in our neighborhoods, knowing what we're unique for and leaning into them and programming them. And I think, Times Square is such a great example where you have all these digital assets really leaning into that. That's the character of the neighborhood and layering in placemaking as part of that. So next we'll go over to Liz in San Antonio for your response to the question.
Sure. And credit to my colleagues, they've covered a lot of this, and I know we all kind of approach conversations with our community, but just want to acknowledge that downtown, this isn't a new phenomenon for center cities. Center cities are where we celebrate victories, we mourn our loss, and where we discuss really hard conversations, whether economic, socioeconomic, racial, right? Like civic engagement. And so we really leaned into that, right? But we wanted to understand our role within that. This slide is not a reflection of that, just so we're clear. I'll get into that. But the moment of reflection really allowed us organizationally to look at our work, look at who we were connecting with, how we were connecting with them. We really utilized some of the extra time, if you will, not putting out dumpster fires, to prioritize and look at our strategy. How are we going to get through this, and how are we going to really rally with the reality of we have 1 million people projected to move here in 2040. Some organizational shifts is we definitely switched a lot of our placemaking from those temporary interjections to permanent and semi-permanent. We wanted to have something lasting so that way when the public came back, they were inspired and discovering something new. And so you saw that a lot in our doubling down of art. We started an Art Everywhere initiative where the art really took on the voice and the amplification of voices and people and perspectives that during these conversations really needed something polarizing. So whether it was, painting on the streets, taking over buildings, we really tried to make that art reflective of the community that maybe had not been engaged or had not been reflected in previous public art. We also really looked into our quality of life. Quality of life to us is our strategy to addressing homelessness or unsheltered. Homelessness and being homeless is not a crime. We recognize that, but really leaning into our partners, whether it was SAPD, whether it was Metro Health, to deploy people and resources and addressing some of the mental health and some of the critical issues that were playing out in downtown that were really more indicative of citywide issues. As Jean mentioned, the image of downtown being desolate, right? Hemorrhaging headlines. There's still people living here. There's still businesses that are thriving, but really managing that narrative and looking at how we can make our partners and really understand our role. Within that role, though, we really broke it down into something called ROSI. So are we responsible? Like, should we be responsible? Are we accountable? Should we be accountable? Should we consult? Who should we consult? And who should we inform? So that really allowed us to participate in thoughtful ways and also understand how we could amplify other people's work or other individuals and nonprofits that had been working to address this issue prior to the pandemic. So within kind of all those moments of reflection and also some of the newfound collaboration opportunities, because that was the silver lining, right? We were calling the zoo, asking them for a lion. We want to have a bike night and shut down all of downtown. We were shooting our shots, so to speak. But we had to hone that in and really understand how we put this in a strategic strategy and framework for work. So these are the 5 frameworks that really arose from that. We had a plan prior to the pandemic, but things had changed. Property owners, sentiments, bottom lines, realities, all that had changed. So really leaning in and doing the work, even though we were, separated, doing it electronically in Zoom, and really staying to the work was critical. It's also really important to note that nobody has the answer to all of our problems, right? We had to really look to what we can change, what we can have impact on, and what is going to make a difference. Within that as well, we looked at how we're measuring. So is it quantitative? Do we need number of people, or is it qualitative? How long did they stay? Did they buy something? Did they follow Centro? Did they pick up track? All of these kind of experiential things that really impacted our PID. So these core foundations are what we're looking to in the future, what our implementation will be rallied around. And it's not just around visitors or hyper locals. It really puts all of the users into perspective and making sure that we're creating a dynamic but authentic downtown for visitors and locals, and that is viable for economic development and attraction. So I know this isn't as visual, but this is really that moment of reflection, which is often hard, again, when you're moving a million miles a direction and really trying to do greater public good in an expedited manner. It really allowed us to establish some boundaries and also really lean into some areas that maybe we were not familiar with, that we really wanted to get up to date and understand needs for.
Thank you so much for that. And I think now I feel like most bids are in the position of what works in the pandemic, because there was so much innovation that came out, whether it was the on-street dining programs, dining outside programs at every bid. I believe in the country had a hand in implementing, how those continue to carry forward, because we saw true economic benefits for our restaurants and downtown businesses with some of those programs. So putting a framework around that is brilliant. So next, for the next about 7 minutes, because now we're going to try to keep at least 10 minutes at the end for questions. We've touched on this, but we really wanted to pick your brain on what makes a great public space. Liz, what are the elements, especially as you're active programming, what are you looking for? A lot of the guests joining are designing those public spaces, or students here at the school. So what are things to consider? I know Liz put together this amazing diagram, so we'll start it with Liz.
Yeah, so, segueing from our last question, right, we became really attuned into what was needed to transform the perception of a space versus just holding another pop-up. I think during the pandemic, placemaking became all the rage, and I'm here to tell you, we've been doing placemaking for a long time, right? But the motivations and the impact they could have, we really perfected. And so this is ultimately everything that Centro, the nonprofit, does, but in Peacock Alley. So every place that we're looking at, we're really leaning into these areas. So whether it's putting art up, which is really hard in downtown, we have historic buildings that we have done an amazing job at preserving. I like to call us the ultimate retropolitan, but because of that preservation and our Office of Historic Preservation, there's some limitations on what we can do creatively. So becoming masters of permitting and right of way and how to put art up if we couldn't paint the building. So on the left side of the alley, that is paint directly on the building. The building was painted in the 60s, thank goodness. But on the right, that is a wheat paste mural. So we had to use different kind of opportunities to put art. We definitely, again, the motivation for Peacock Alley was first and foremost promoting small business. So allowing the businesses that are nearby the alley first dibs on if they have a product or if they want to activate, as well as local makers that don't have a brick and mortar, that have compelling items to sell that are, just amazing and so culturally relevant and puro, as we call it here, and really putting them in a position of success, but utilizing that opportunity to also train them in ways to effectively market, how to seek their own permits, how to close a street, how to activate a park. So really getting them embedded into other venues and other programs that we could benefit as a downtown. Activation and play is a big part of our organization. Our CEO, Matt, is a former toy maker. And so we really try to make playful interventions. I know the image of the table is not playful, but we usually have board games. We make it snow. Really kind of hilarious, but playful for all ages, not just kids, but to really rubberneck the adults. Clean and safe and homeless assistance, right? The alley is a commercial alley. It is for everyone. So if somebody is unsheltered, seeking services, is coming to the alley, we welcome them. They are part of our interconnected community, and we provide and support them with resources, or just, again, acknowledging them to be part of the space, allowing them to sit, right? It's not a crime to be homeless. It's not a crime to walk around their downtown, but then holding them accountable for, antisocial behaviors. Clean and safe, we already power wash, we already pan and broom. So we have incredible knowledge of how to make a space beautiful. In the alley in particular, we deodorize it. So it smells compelling, right? That most alleys, that may not be something you associate with. And then landscaping and advocacy. So we use the alley oftentimes for a lot of civic conversations, a lot of events and programming that invites dynamic, polarizing conversations. But then also really leaning that advocacy into other places and other partners. So that way it's not just an activation, it really lends itself to progress, or that there's a constant progression, and that there's follow-up, or that there's change. And that may lead to advocacy. So I mentioned the responsible, accountable, consult. So if it turns out that we need to consult, we need to inform, we need to be accountable, we're going to go to our partners, whether it's the city or county or SAPD, to say, hey, we are in it and we see this. So again, this is a great summary of all the things that most PIDs do, but that just happen to really work and articulate some of the great progress that Peacock Alley has been able to make because we've addressed these issues.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think two things that I pick up in this diagram is, one, everything is relatively affordable, right? I mean, we're looking at just your typical lounge chairs that you could pick up at the hardware store, or your typical, pop-up tent. So I think lighter, quicker, cheaper, is really resonating, that theory that it doesn't necessarily have to break the bank to make spaces active and vibrant. And then also the second is the power of 10 that Projects for Public Spaces always describes, where there's always 10 things happening at the same time. So with that, speaking about 10 things happening at the same time, that's Nicola in Minneapolis. So we'll go over to Lisa for your quick thoughts on what makes a great public space. Lisa, you're muted.
Sorry, everybody. Sorry. Liz's diagram was great. I'm not sure any of us can add too much more to it. But I do think there are some of those basic things we touch. And in the case, food, fun, family. These are all the things we're looking for, right? In this case, this is a local community organization that trains kids how to do African style drumming, right, and dance. So this is during our Downtown Street Art Festival. Really happy to partner with them and just to see the level of joy and excitement on the street. So in the fun category, chess, always a perennial favorite. And then I think getting at the idea of lighting, getting at nighttime, thinking of other times of the year, and how light can contribute to spectacle and an experiential feeling that taps into warmth and excitement and memory and commemoration. And this is a shot, this is not from Minneapolis, this is from Leek Street Arches, but you were talking about like what makes it great. Well, I always go back to the art, but I don't want to just go back to the art, because I want to go back to the artists as well, because everything you see here happened by the hand of a person who spent time in this space. And we do so much of the work we do, we partner with artists to do it. And so part of that partnership has to be about that reciprocity piece, where we are working with them, making sure that they we're not working with them in an extractive manner, that we're supporting them and their work, and not just by creating a platform for them. So.
Thanks, Lisa. Jean, do you have any thoughts to add?
Yeah, I mean, I love Lisa's chart and kind of this comprehensive overview of what makes great public space, which I'm also learning a lot about in this role here. I'll just speak from a programming perspective, you know, around, again, like Lisa, an arts and cultural perspective. I think we feel very responsible here to provide the element of surprise and delight in Times Square. So, you know, we know that people are coming here with certain expectations, often open-ended. And I think we all really rally around this idea of intervening and activating our public plazas with maybe something people weren't expecting, but delighted to experience, and adds to that kind of just the qualitative experience of being in Times Square. And I think that comes from, you can do that with planned programming that's on our website that some people might follow. But I also think that the element of surprise and unplanned pop-ups is really fun for folks. I mean, we in Times Square don't necessarily, we're not trying to drive more traffic here per se, but we're trying to maybe sustain people's attention while they're here and give them a great experience. So we've done things like, you know, as well as Lisa pointed out, we have 80 events all summer long. This is an example of an Alvin Ailey extension community workshop where they brought out their own folks, but encouraged people to come in and join. But this is an example of a surprise Skrillex DJ set that we did on Friday that was unannounced, and somehow 4,000 young people found out about it. So like, they had the time of their life in Times Square, and we'll never forget that. I also was trying to have conversations with my colleagues here about what makes great public space. Just even if it is our sanitation workers, safety workers, or the events we plan, just giving people the impression that it's a space that is being cared for and that someone is invested in, I think makes the public feel a certain way and puts them at ease and more invested in a space. So just having a presence on the ground, whether it's, again, through structured events, something that's a surprise, or just, you know, having your staff and colleagues present on the plazas each day. And then one last thing I'll throw into the mix is, you know, and you see the red steps behind this crowd. Like, it's been also interesting to see, this is obviously, they were built before my time, I think in 2009, but they've become an iconic meeting spot. So in a place that is just, you know, can feel quite overwhelming, having something, even if it's much smaller in scale, for people to say, meet me at the red steps or meet me at the fill in the blank, I think is a great public space element to kind of mark a space and give it an identity, obviously along with all of like the movable furniture that you can push to the side for a pop-up DJ set. But yeah, that's just another thing I wanted to throw in for the designers on the call.
Yeah, that is great. Thank you. Did you have something else to add, Jean?
Oh, I was just gonna add that in terms of programming, another thing we try and do is think about how people are already using the space. So like, we know that office workers are getting off at 5 p.m. or in this case, in this moment, a lot of big offices are trying to get more workers to come in. So when would they be excited to say that something is on, you know, display for them? So we program our performances all summer long at exactly 5 p.m. and we make sure that they kind of lead the public into maybe what they would be doing for dinner or an 8 p.m. show. Like, we try and understand how people might already be coming through the plaza to kind of augment their experience. And even, you know, if the break dancers kind of take over the day from noon to 5, like, and we need to switch gears and do a sound check, we'll just work with their schedule, and like, you know, groups will shift plazas, and we want it to feel organic, and we want it to feel like the people are using the plazas in the way they want to use them, but then punctuating that with some structure, and having it all be kind of synergistic is the ideal hope.
That's great. And Lisa added a comment on placekeeping, the importance of, did you want to describe that, Lisa?
Oh, I was just, I've been providing running commentary on everyone else's comments, so it's fine. I was just saying, when you look at a space and you don't just look at it as a place you're going to act upon, but you look at it as a place that has a life in community already and has meaning for people already, it's important for you to observe, to see, to pay attention, to know who's using the space and how, and to serve up, you know, maybe you're providing a better, stronger structure or scaffolding around what's happening there, which is exactly what Jean was describing. So to me, that gets at that idea of, it's not placemaking where we're making something happen in your neighborhood to you, right? It's placekeeping where we see what you're raising up and we're helping you preserve it.
Looks like Liz had one more point as well.
Lisa nailed it. I mean, the key to placemaking and successful places are the people, are the users, those that have previously historically used it, and those that you hope to inspire to use it in the future. Engaging and observing is time consuming. But it is so critical. And most of the time during the pandemic and post-pandemic, it changes. That's what's been kind of crazy. You go there one day and it's one experience, you go there another and it's a different. So lean into that observation, do an inventory, but also like ask the experts or ask the people that aren't using it why they're not. It's hard work, but it's worth it. And it saves you some steps, even though it seems like it's very time consuming.
Thanks, Liz. And the other thing too, key, I think, is good photography, as you saw from all of the panelists. And what's funny is this photo is the ice skating rink in the winter. And I told the photographer to get a good shot of it with it just rained that morning to make it look like a splash pad so we could pitch that to a sponsor. But anyways, be creative with photography and capture it and the power of photography, as we saw today. Carol has a question. How do you engage your local community college and universities in these events and this work? What are some possibilities? Does anyone have examples of that?
I can share a little bit that we've done on our alleyway project. Again, we're not as far along, I would say, as the Peacock Alleyway project, but we're adjacent to the University of St. Thomas, which is a Catholic university, but nested within that Catholic university is the Doherty Family College, which is a 2-year associate's program for folks who are like first generation college students who are in economically challenging circumstances, who are probably at high risk for not being able to complete a college education. And we partner with them intentionally. We have an intern from that college with us every year throughout the summer, helping support our work. And they had and we worked with them, having additional folks from that college talk about like how this space could support them. So within the network of that Catholic university, which is enormous and well-funded and full of rich folks, right, is this associate's degree program by a college that is 96% students of color. And they didn't really have a place. And so it was interesting to have the conversation with them, like how could this space, this alleyway project space, help support you all as you transition, right? It's a 2-year degree, so most of them have been in pandemic times. How does it create a place of opportunity for you all to connect with each other at school? So that's been a really interesting conversation. And in order to do that, you really have to reach out. You have to recognize when you're doing things in partnership with people that it's got to be reciprocal. You got to know what they're trying to achieve and know what you're trying to achieve and find that overlap and focus there, because you'll get, it's so productive when you're moving along with partners. So much, you know, it makes all the work better, it makes the audience broader, makes the finished thing, whatever it is, much more attuned to what should be happening there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Gabe, to answer your question, we've worked with the University of Texas, San Antonio. They have been in downtown for a while and have made great strides to make more campus in downtown, but we worked with their School of Architecture and Urban Planning on some curriculum related to the alley. You know, we didn't want to just assume that we could put lights up in art, and now we're utilizing that talent to look at how we extend the Peacock Alley initiative to the next phase of the alley, which is right across the street. But finding creative curriculum and real life space for them to visualize and have an immersive classroom has been really groundbreaking for us, and we hope to grow that with other universities that are in the regional downtown center.
Gabe, I'll just jump in before I have to leave, but from our perspective at School of Architecture and Planning here at UWM, that's exactly what we do. We work with different community groups. Sometimes it's a course where they're designing pop-up elements, or we have a mobile design box where we look at how to activate vacant storefronts. From a studio perspective, I obviously integrate public placemaking and all of the required elements of a project. Then we have a design center that does quite a bit. It's a fee for service, but one of the projects I'm in my 7th year working on is green schoolyards. So we are looking at green infrastructure, placemaking, outdoor classrooms, but it has had a significant impact on the curriculum of the public school system here. So a lot of different ways that our professors are engaged. So it's really exciting. And we have a School of Arts that does things as well. from graphic elements to programming. So I would encourage everybody who's out there to find that connection with your university. If you notice, there's a survey in there. We really would love your feedback on today and ideas for additional speakers. We can hang on for another 5 or 10 minutes, but if you jump off, I just want you to know the link will be sent for the recording, so you can follow up on any of the visuals that you saw today. And then our next speaker will be March 28th. It'll be highlighting some innovations in our historic King Drive Business Improvement District. So you can take a look at some of our upcoming events. So Gabe, I'll pass it back to you. I do need to run the studio, but you can.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know, thank you, Carolyn. I know Nora had her hand up and then it went away. Is Nora still there?
I am, yeah. I was notified to type my question in the chat, so I was doing that, but I can say it out loud now.
Feel free.
Yeah, I was just wondering, how do you make your spaces and like the outreach work that you do language friendly? Since I know I'm from Milwaukee, and we do have a growing population for immigrants and refugees from different Asian, African countries, but also different countries in Latin America. So I know for me, it's really important to think of the lens as a daughter of immigrants, right? What it felt like to grow up in certain situations where I felt uncomfortable. So when you do outreach, and I know this is one of my biggest, now as a professional, right? One of my biggest obstacles is how do you do outreach in an authentic way, but also making sure that not everything is also accessible in English, but then in those people's like native language as well. So just wanted to hear from the panelists, because I know there's big refugee and immigrant populations in all the cities that are being represented today.
Thank you. Great question. Do any of our panelists want to chime in? Jean?
I'll just say that for our public art exhibitions where we have signage around them, we, look at the most spoken languages in New York City, aside from English, and, with only so much limited real estate to use, we have all of our exhibitions project information in English, Spanish, French, Mandarin, and then a Braille inlay beneath that. But that's only one touch point. So I hear what you're saying. The question is more about also just like engagement and going to people where they're at in their language and kind of being, and bringing folks in that way, not just, throwing them a bone on some exhibition signage when they get there. And yeah, I think there's lots more to do in that area, but I'll just say it's something we're thinking about and all the different touch points in which we can make people feel welcome. And know that there's more space for translation and conversation around that.
I think for us, we really use, I love, Lisa, that you have alley cats. We actually call our activators alley rats. It's an ode to the river rat, which is somebody who's worked in the service industry on the river. So we're not calling alley rats, but it's a term of endearment. But one of the things we really try to impress upon them is, we want them to bring their own perspective, their own vendors, their own communities. So that way it's not really Centro always that's guiding and leading and creating that inclusiveness, but it's the individuals who are closest to it. So the events and the activations and the outreach is reflective of the activator, which could have another district, another nonprofit, other groups that we have never interacted with. And so I think the ownership and the storytelling and narrative that they create is far more thoughtful and inclusive than sometimes Centro could even try to be in a temporary instance. But I think downtowns in general and specifically in North America, there's a lot to be said on translation services. I know San Antonio was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and we're hoping that that translates into a wide variety of accessibility, whether it's language, access, resources, or at least, again, places and spaces that are reflective of those that are making and continuing to make our community so dynamic and amazing. So.
Thank you so much. I'm being told to wrap it up. As I said, we could be here all day talking about this, but I wanted to thank our panelists, Jean, Lisa, and Liz. Your creativity, innovation, the grit and know how to get these projects done in your cities are so inspiring. And thank you so much for everyone who joined us, and Jenny behind the scenes as well. There is a survey to take after this lecture, and then make sure to check out the university's website for the next Innovative Cities Lecture event. So again, thank you to our panelists, and I'm sure if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Carolyn, and we can help address those questions that you have with our panelists as well. Thank you.